All right, welcome to the first public consultation on our new care plan for our second decade ending in 2023. It's currently called, and I think it's probably the final title. I don't see any changes, but who knows, based on the next 6 months of work with our board and work with all of you, it might change. But it's currently called Wellsprings, Make Change and Give Care. This presentation is the Fluent English version of the plan. We'll talk more about all the variations of the plan in terms of access later in today's presentation. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Jessa Agilo, and I'm the founder and CEO of ArtsPond Tandar. So thank you for joining us. Just two quick words about care and Wellsprings, in case you aren't quite sure what we mean by these words, before we dive a little bit further in. So from a plain didactic point of view, Wellsprings by dictionary.com is defined as a head or source of a spring, stream, river, etc. That's the first definition, which is, we are ArtsPond, so I'm interested in the water connection there. But the second definition is a little bit more interesting. And it is a source or supply of anything, especially when considered inexhaustible. For example, a wellspring of affection. There's also a duality of wellness and springing forward or looking forward to a future and jumping, but also the care and wellness that comes from freshwater springs that well up out of the ground. So there's lots of meanings in this word for me that have connections to make change and give care. Generally speaking, I would say care for us is an essential seed for positive social change. We can't get to realizing and sustaining positive social change until the necessary steps about care are in place, both in prep for the change, but also while the change is happening and all the ripple effects that follow. So care, roughly, simply speaking, is about the materials, actions, and values that we share with individuals, communities, and ecosystems that they need or we invite them to engage with so that they can move purely from surviving to deeply thriving. And it's that move from surviving to thriving where a lot of change, a lot of systems change is needed, but there's also a lot of care that's needed before, during, and after. And so our strategic plan, strategic guide, then it was a care guide, and now it's a care plan, is trying to look at this duality of trying to balance moving systemic change forward while being where marginalized, oppressed, underserved communities are in the present moment to make sure that they receive the care they need to lift themselves up into becoming caregivers themselves and change makers into the future. That's just a little bit about it. So the agenda for today is acknowledgements, talking a little bit about where we have been in the past. It's our second decade this year, our 10th anniversary. Where are we going with this plan in the next 10 years? What's happening in the next stage of our planning process to get this plan officially released and engage with the community? How can you participate in the planning process and ask any questions that you would like? So very quickly on the acknowledgements, I would just like to give a quick land acknowledgement that from our home here in Takaranto, we express our gratitude for the opportunity to live, work, gather, and travel in the ancestral lands of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas of the Credit. These territories are part of Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. I would like to recognize that Indigenous peoples are the customary keepers of the Great Lakes watershed where we reside, as well as all of Turtle Island. We honor their traditions, cultures, and legacies of care for all living things on Earth, and we commit to amplifying their voices and values. This is a digital meeting, so we also acknowledge that we gather and connect communities across this vast country in digital spaces and recognize and respect the diverse Indigenous nations and all their enduring presence and contributions in all realms of life, real, virtual, natural, and otherwise. I'd also like to acknowledge our current funders, which is Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of Canada, Ontario Arts Council, and the Government of Ontario, as well as myself, Agilo Arts. Their support is really essential for doing this kind of complex, care-oriented work. So thank you for their support. All right, diving into our agenda now. Past, where have we been? The visual graphic on screen is from our one-page strategic plan for our first decade, which was released partway through our first decade in around 2018. And it had four key commitments to help, or strategies perhaps, to help advance and strengthen equity in arts and culture. They were looking at social, spatial, digital, and fiscal or economic concerns. And we tied those four strategies to strengthen equity to the United Nations Global Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of those, and we connect to 12. No poverty, good health and well-being, quality education being some of the most important ones, sustainable cities and communities, partnerships for the goals, gender equality, reduced inequalities are all also really important. Well, they all are. Decent work and economic growth is all really important to us. If I had to narrow it down, there were, because this is our past decade, there were three main strategies of activities that we undertook to try to advance these goals related to building knowledge, building ecosystems, and building platforms. So over the past 10 years, we did quite a bit of work around social, fiscal, spatial, and accessibility justice. Access was one very quickly added focus that was not in the previous diagram. Working with disability communities, we started focusing on that around 2018 or 19, halfway through our first decade. So that's a new add, but doing lots of work in the early years around knowledge and ecosystem building, trying to gain understanding and evidence for what is needed in equity deserving communities and how to work with, by, and for them to realize remedies or therapies to respond to the challenges and opportunities that they face in this complex world. So gradually we started getting towards platform building. I'm not going to go into the history of all these programs because we don't have time, but essentially in the first couple of years, trying to build evidence through knowledge and ecosystem building, resulting on platform building. And in the last couple of years, it's been a mixture of all of those as we try to complexify our understanding and our journey making around the root causes, ripple effects, and remedies to precarity in arts and culture. If I had to summarize our vision in the first decade, it was trying to find the root causes and remedies to precarity in arts and culture. We started around economic precarity in the first 2 years, but very quickly started adding social justice, spatial justice, digital justice, accessibility justice, and others in terms of responses and needs to address precarity and elevate people's prosperity and opportunity in the sector. So it comes to the future. We are still very much in the process of moving from a change maker focus towards a care-minded focus. In our first decade, I think we thought of ourselves as a change maker, but increasingly over the last few years, we've shifted our focus to change and care, and increasingly more of a focus on care. hence the care plan for the next decade. The plan itself has 5 major areas, and this is a motto in our design thinking that we are using in all of our work. So for our software building, for our knowledge seeking work, and our ecosystem building, trying to imagine structures of community building and strategy that's built on concepts, issues, goals that you can hold in one hand. So no more than 5 things. In this case, there are 6 because we also have a summary at the beginning, a visual summary on one page that tries to summarize, give you a visual picture of the plan overall. But the plan itself has 5 sections: purposes, why we exist; pledges, who we commit to; priorities, what our goals are; paths, how we will get there; and ponds, where it will happen. So let's just quickly run through some of these. We're starting with the summary. So I'm actually going to try and very quickly give you a view on the big picture, and then we'll dive into some of the details. This is not, this graphic is not published in the plan itself yet. It will be available as an appendix, but I want to share this as some of the thinking that has happened over the last 6 or 5 years as we've looked to shift to become a care-minded organization. Essentially, ArtsPond is a NASO, a National Arts Service or Support Organization. But we really don't see service or support as sufficient. We don't resonate with service or support only as a way to describe what we are trying to do and the accountabilities that we are trying to be mindful of as we work with, by, and for equity deserving communities. Especially as a white founded but not a white led organization, service and support is not enough. We need, if we are going to be in allyship and solidarity with all these diverse communities, then we need to do more. So there's the idea of an ASO plus. So an art something other or a sundry organization that's still a service support organization, but it's doing that and more than service and support. So what does that actually maybe look like? We thought a lot about change. And in our first decade, as I said, we thought of it as a change maker. What is it that we were looking at? We were looking at trying to change the systems that embedded and kept things going around disparities and inequalities, the precarity of the sector, and increasingly with the pandemic and the climate crisis, a very complex, intersectional, multimodal, complex range of crises called the polycrisis. You can read about polycrisis in the sector. There's lots of writings about it in the last few years. It essentially just means that there's lots of crises happening that are interconnected, and you can't solve them all, and you can't solve one of them without trying to consider them all together, the connections between them. From a care-minded point of view, thinking about not inequity, but justice, as well as prosperity, and as an alternative to vulnerability and precarity. And instead of polycrisis, polycare. On a quadrant, we create a little axis, then that care and change is our vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, we have on the left-hand side survival, where we're trying to address some of the dangers, infrastructure and community resource deserts that are happening, and disasters like the climate crisis and the pandemic, I would consider to be disasters. Racism is perhaps a danger. The lack of affordable housing or access to internet is a desert, perhaps. And the opposite on the horizontal axis would be thriving. And thriving where and for whom? There's lots of complexity here, but 3 what I would mention would be thriving for individuals or people, for communities or publics, and for ecosystems planet-wide. So this is kind of where we started about 5 years ago now, thinking about this little quadrant and trying to break it out into 5. Not 4, because we are trying to, that's been our inspiration, is things we can hold in one hand. So there's 5 aspects to this quadrant we're trying to break out of. And the first would be about service, trying to offer services to people in need, people who are seeking or need care. So care seekers. We primarily need to look at changing systems and changing the services that we provide in order to help support, it's the wrong word, but to help strengthen the financial vitality of care seekers. So that focus is primarily around so that they can survive better, but also so that we can change the system. We need to change the system so that they can survive better in this very complex scenario. Caretakers then would move a little bit closer to care, but still more around a survival perspective, and shift from service to support. And I'm going to talk about what all of these mean in more detail when we get to different stages of the plan. So I'm just going to go over these quickly. The next step, still on the survival side, but right up at care, would be a social purpose orientation. So instead of service and support, we now have another S of social purpose, and that's trying to work with and empower caregivers that are supporting caretakers, then supporting care seekers. As we shift towards thriving on the care side, we would have care makers focused on social change. So just shifting from change makers to care makers. And around the change side, but still on the thrive side, would be care shapers, which is about social innovation and systems innovation and other modes of thinking, which is trying to change the system. Care makers would be trying to develop programs and activities in the moment, in the near and present future, whereas care shapers are focused on the longer term, distant future, looking at the big systems change that we need. So we have developed strategies for all of these groups because in some ways we are a care seeker and we support care seekers, other ways all through all 5. We are all of these 5, and we think many people in the community have aspects of these in their lives. We're going to talk more about this in the care game, which will be launched on July 10th later this year. So watch out for that at our website. We're going to talk all about this in more detail. This is a really complicated diagram, and I don't have time to go through it today. We will do another video all about it, but this is where we landed after about 4 years of work and thinking as the next evolution of this. And this is the meat and bones of our care plan. So there are 5 priorities: activate access to essential services with care seekers, grow the versatility of community support with caretakers is the second one. And those are around the change and survival area. Survive and thrive around a care perspective would be in orange and pink here. Invigorate the social value and benefits of care with caregivers, and hearten the potential for social change with care makers. And at the end, we have the care shapers perspective, illuminating wise passages to systemic justice. And then on the inside are all the seeds, shall we say, the ideas, the dreams, the values that are captured by single words that have a lot of meaning to us. And I'll just give one example on the green area there, which is demand. This is the demand of people in need in our community. They are primarily care seekers, but not only this. And there are 5 elements to demand: disasters, deserts, and dangers we've already introduced. But on the other side, moving away from more negative points of view towards more positive would be requests or hopes for access and care doulas and their dreams and desires for the future in terms of demand for services that can support these things. We could then maybe pop up to the opposite corner in pink or darkish red for heart. There are 5 perspectives for care makers: harm, hinder, hack, help, and harmonize. So harm would be in terms of our heart, there are a lot of harms that happen in the sector. So we need to understand what the harms are from different groups in order to be able to do anything. Similarly, there are lots of things that annoy us or hinder us, and collectively together, they might be actually more harmful than what we think of as harms. But individually, we maybe they just annoy us, and we do the best to just ignore them. But I think there needs to be some possibility for attention to them. Hacking would be hacking the system, so moving towards a more positive side, hacking the system to try to improve it, but it's also neutral in the way that powerful systems, colonialism also hacks us. We get hacked back. So it's meant to be a messy middle. And then help and harmonize is like doulas and desires, trying to move towards the positive side. All of these dashed areas are the intersection points between heart and justice, between justice and demand, between demand and path, between path and life. And rather than focusing on the S's of ASO with social change, social purpose, social innovation, these dotted intersection points are focused on what we call our wisdom tree. And that has 5 elements of knowledge, building knowledge. Knowledge starts in blue, actually. It's the last one in this, where we actually, with the wisdom tree, starts at knowledge seeking and then goes to knowledge sense making, knowledge shaping, knowledge sharing, and knowledge stewarding. And there's, in all of these steps, in order to realize and activate service, grow the versatility of support, there is knowledge that we must understand, share, shape, or steward. And so that's what these dotted areas are trying to focus on, is what is the knowledge and the wisdom that we need to gather in order to move forward these priorities. So that's a little bit more than I was planning to talk about, but just to give you a sense of this. And this results in what we're calling 20 Wellsprings of care. And they're inspired by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them. At the moment, they're just in four colors here with our purposes in green. The final version of this plan, each of these little tiles will have a color of their own. But there's 5 of them, each related to our pledges, our priorities, our paths and ponds. And they come directly from the diagram I just shared. So pledges are to enliven human belonging with equity-deserving groups at every turn, deepening belonging, strengthening inclusion, celebrating diversity, boost equity, and enable access are those 5 pledges. And we're gonna go into detail in each of these, so I'm not gonna go any further in this diagram because we'll just repeat ourselves. But this is the visual summary that we're trying to, if we distill all of this, we can, in a simple version, this is the 20. So purposes, why we exist, ultimately we would say we nourish positive change and care with, by, and for creatives of all kinds. We've worked on an updated mission, vision, and mandate statement, which you can see here. I'm not going to read it out loud here, but I'll just point out a few things. So our mission is to nurture thriving ecosystems of care. That's language we've had for a long time. And through the wisdom and creativity of arts and culture, what is new is a commitment to all realms of life. And for us, if I go back to the ponds, nurture creative wisdom and well-being in all realms of life, we sustain authenticity in real life, empower ingenuity in virtual life, preserve vitality in natural life, manifest hope in dream life, and honor legacy in ancestral life. So this is a very big leap in terms of where we were in our first decade and where we want to be in our second, is really looking at the intersectionalities of not just real and digital life that we've spent the last 10 years on, but natural, dream, and ancestral life. That's a big step. Our vision is to empower artists and other creatives from the margins to guide positive community change and shared personal care. That's not a big change. to helping them, to equipping them to overcome obstacles and crises. I would say in the past, we would only have used obstacles, but the lessons of the pandemic made us realize the importance of being adaptable to crises also. By doing so, we believe we can help boost their capacity to grow springs of wellness. So that comes from the Wellsprings title, with, by, and for us all. Our mandate then is to strengthen prosperity and well-being by cultivating cultures of creative care in human and natural life. So human is meant to incorporate 4 of the 5 realms, with natural being the 5th. We seek to address the various causes and consequences of precarity with a very intersectional point of view, which is not new, including spatial, social, economic, digital, disability, and accessibility concerns. What is new is the addition of environmental. Also, what is new, it's not explicitly stated anywhere here yet, is in the last 3 years, we've become a disability-led organization. So we would like access and disability to be the foundation of our efforts to engage and empower community going forward. I think it is because they are the community that are the most educated in care and also are in the most need of care. So they have a lot to offer, but also they understand where the gaps and barriers are. And if we can empower and enable and lift up those communities together, then we have hit some necessary steps, which can be then expanded to others. We have a Seeds for Change and Theory of Care, which is trying to summarize that dialogue between change and care. For us, there are 4 values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that we embrace as necessary, shall I say, precursors to be able to work on any care-oriented conversations. There are systems that need to be thought about and minded, and we need to make changes in our own organization and the communities that we work with in order to truly have an intersectional approach in allyship and solidarity with all the equity-seeking groups that we are committed to, which are many. So create, engage, share, and care are those 4 C's. You can see them on screen. I'm going to talk about these in another video, so I'm going to slip by them for now. But they then, once we can kind of understand these 4 seeds, then we are ready, we think, to look at a theory of not change, but of care. If we can adopt these 4 steps in our work, then we think we will be successful in moving a care-centered society together within and beyond arts and culture. And it really starts with heartening deep trust-based relationships between change makers or care makers and caregivers, and then working with care seekers and other caretakers and other communities to get us to the point where we can realize care in an intersectional, accessible way. So we can look at those in more detail, and we'll have another video all about that. So let's get to our pledges, who we commit to. Our big pledge is to enliven human belonging with equity-deserving groups at every turn. So our 5 pledges I could summarize with the acronym BIDEA, rather than the more understood and well-used DEI. We make a commitment to BIDEA, which represents deep belonging, strength, and inclusion. So belonging, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access is the acronym BIDEA. So we would like to deepen belonging, strengthen inclusion, celebrate diversity, boost equity, and enable access. Deepen belonging for us, well, all 5 of these are meant to be intersectional across all the equity-deserving groups. I would highlight specific groups that would belong, especially when have a lot to offer and also need extra attention around them. So for us, belonging is around 2S LGBTQIA plus, women, trans, and non-binary communities, trying to look at increasing personal well-being and collective vitality and spirit by bolstering human connections and acceptance of their lives, identities, and experiences. This would apply to all other equity deserving groups. We're just picking out specific groups for each of them. So we would strengthen inclusion by welcoming and embracing different perspectives, particularly with youth, newcomers, francophones, deaf people, or those that use sign language and other language minorities, primarily ESL, English as a second language minorities, with the hope that we could enhance empathy and opportunities for storytelling. Celebrate diversity is focused primarily around Indigenous, Black, and other racialized people of color, but all these groups would be around celebrate diversity. But we'd like to work with these communities to increase unity, solidarity, safety, and healing by celebrating their identities, experiences, and cultures, and deepening awareness and understanding and respect for them. Equity would be focused around outside the core, so suburban, rural, and remote regions, as well as low-income communities. And there are many under there. There are families, there's gig workers, there's multiple disciplines in the artistic, creative, and cultural industries. Lots of groups fit under there, so it's a catch-all, but we want to improve representation and participation in arts and culture by ensuring a just, fair, and equal economy and society. The last one would be focused around primarily deaf and disabled people to increase innovation in and for care by providing ample resources and opportunities that have been envisioned and offered by deaf and disabled people primarily. So our priorities are what our goals are, and we can go through these pretty quickly now. The big summary statement is to ease precarity and boost prosperity while protecting the environment. So our 5 priorities are summarized by 5 S's, or the more cumbersome SSCCJ. So let me talk about those in a second here. So activate, this is about the 5 visions on ASO that I talked about at the beginning. So services support, social purpose, social change, and social innovation. Activate service, grow support, invigorate care, hearten change, and illuminate justice are the 5. So let's just briefly talk about them. So activate access to essential services with care seekers or people in need by ensuring their security and safety through the co-creation of accessible knowledge resources and affordable fee for services that help strengthen their creativity and economic stability, lifting them up from ideally a purely survival mode to a thriving mode. Growing support would be about deepening and strengthening the versatility of the types of free and in-kind resources and services that are offered as community support by caretakers and others. Caretakers being primarily intermediaries and service-related support organizations, ASOs, traditional ASOs, hoping to increase collective empowerment and engagement. Third one, to invigorate a social purpose and a benefit or understanding of the benefits and value of care with caregivers by sustaining their contributions and providing enhanced professional development that helps caregivers reach a wider audience of care seekers, help educate caretakers about how they can be better supported in order to reach a wider audience, all with the purpose of caregivers themselves, as well as the communities they support, feeling a deepened sense of life worth and meaning because they have a career that's more deeply entwined with their commitments to care and caregiving. Heart and change would be around challenging injustices, inspiring empathy, and mobilizing collective action to increase prosperity and care in both human and natural life, with a focus around social change, social movements in solidarity with other communities outside arts and culture in the here and now and in the near future. Illuminate justice would be looking more systemically, so looking at 10 years or longer generally would be the timeline for some of this work, trying to illuminate our awareness and appreciation for the complexities of systemic barriers and gaps in the sector and what we can do about it, and engaging communities to validate and invalidate our ideation around that. So there's lots of work and education around shaping policies and developing wise practices that are building on strengths in the community that have already and stewarding that knowledge with respect, but also developing brand new knowledge from a social innovation perspective that helps us think about new ways of doing things that are more care-minded. In the more detailed version of the plan, which I have not shared out yet in any kind of way, these will be in the appendices when the appendices are published. Our 5 priorities are building on that initial complicated diagram with demands and all that we ended up before we got into this section here. Building on all of that, we have impacts and outcomes that have been highlighted for each of these 5 priorities. So we already talked about our desired outcomes for activating service being strengthened individual creativity and financial stability. We have 5 measures for those for outcomes. Those are practical, relatively easily quantitatively measurable. Impacts are less easily measured, more qualitative, so genuine belonging, inclusive safety, diverse sharing, equitable economy, accessible solidarity. Those impacts are harder to measure, but are very important. So these would be like the Sustainable Development Goals, the sub-goals under each of the Wellsprings tiles. So we'll be talking about these in more detail in another video, because these are very much a work in progress. Pass, how will we get there? Humming along. Our big picture path is to nurture creative wisdom and well-being in all realms of life. We already talked about all realms of life, so let's go into a little bit more detail. There are 5 steps with the awkward acronym of CCAPS, or CKEPS. Stimulate creativity, bolster knowledge, intertwine ecosystems, hatch platforms, and amplify stories. We, in our first decade, focused on building knowledge, building ecosystems, and building platforms. So those 3 have been retained. Just instead of building knowledge, building ecosystems, and building platforms, we now have a little bit more specificity around them with bolster knowledge, intertwine ecosystems, and hatch platforms. We've added creativity, building creativity by stimulating it, and story building, which is amplify stories. So stimulate creativity is working with creators, artists, makers, to help flourish the type and impact of experimentation within the arts and culture sector, particularly around social justice issues and how we can use art to express the needs and the harms and the hopes and aspirations around some of these complex issues that we're interested in. And we'll do so by hosting collaborative, co-creative things like co-creation labs, creative thought fellowships, and residencies, and other collaborative stuff. We'll build or bolster knowledge with stewards, educators, curators, stewards primarily being intermediaries and art service organizations, but also knowledge keepers and knowledge stewards. Curators, I think, would fit in there. Yeah, curators and educators, looking to enhance skills and knowledge exchange in the arts and culture sector, and more broadly, looking at, instead of residencies and labs, looking at more self-directed commissioning of fellowship thought pieces around specific areas of expertise and trying to steward and protect the ownership of that knowledge in the community by acknowledging who creates it and paying them to work and share that knowledge with others. Internships, mentorships, and other kind of employment opportunities in our organization community. We'd intertwine ecosystems by guiding collective resource sharing across all the silos in our sector, geographic, disciplinary, cultural, and other, looking to create a more dynamic and connected ecology in our subculture, working with producers, managers, governors, leaders, founders of organizations, of intermediaries, working very closely with stewards and educators. Here, there's some blending of these responsibilities, but just working with the people in leadership of entities and organizations that are building ecosystems and trying to intertwine connections, strengthen the connections between them, and break down some of those silos that exist. Hatching platforms is really about the solution or remedy and therapy building with a mind to care. So working with entrepreneurs, engineers, and designers to realize innovative remedies to precarity in all realms of life, empowered by the impacted voices and seeking to democratize access to resources in the community. And amplify stories would be about trying to better understand barriers and opportunities to social change in the arts and culture sector, and more broadly, working with impacted groups, advocates, and activists, both inside and outside the arts, trying to provide opportunities for marginalized voices to share their experiences and perspectives and create innovative knowledge toolkits that share and inspire others to get into the stimulate creativity, bolster knowledge, and intertwine ecosystems and hatch platform cycle in a new way that ArtsPond isn't currently able to address. So this is why they're all circular. They're meant to kind of feed back in once you just keep going through the cycle and adding new understandings and opportunities. So where it will happen? Our big picture statement is to unite creative change makers and caregivers in common and uncommon cause. Common being about care, common, like what common sense approaches, although I hate how progressive conservatives have really taken common sense away from us, but both like expected and unexpected ways of wise, deeply familiar, as well as new and innovative ways of coming together, essentially, is what I mean by that. And so AIVHL, AVIL, or Ravenda, RVNDA are the acronyms here, where we work in those 5 realms of real life, virtual life, natural life, dream life, and ancestral life to sustain authenticity, empower ingenuity, preserve vitality, manifest hope, and honor legacy. So in real life, it's really about building those trust and respect connections that are necessary to work in solidarity. So I actually name it as love and respect. And there are many steps that we have to go through to get to love and respect. And so it's really trying to understand that and going deeper. And I've named here urban, suburban, rural, and remote communities in particular across Canada as one of the areas of focus for this. As a national ASO, that's important to us. Empowering ingenuity in virtual life to strengthen equitable, ethical, and responsible use of technology and digital technology and infrastructure, naming gig workers and other low-income groups locally and globally. So I think much of the platform building software development that we are working on will have the opportunity and the need to go international to survive, really, because there's not enough users in Canada to make it sustainable in part, but also the knowledge that's needed to be ingenuous, to have this imaginative understanding of what we need to do and what we can do for software, we need partnerships and connections internationally, because Canada alone cannot build the software solutions that the whole world needs in arts and culture. So we're looking in the next 10 years to shift some of our focus, not just locally and nationally, but globally. Preserve vitality and natural life. It's not named here specifically, but I think this would be more of a regional focus for ArtsPond in the short term, looking at Ontario and the Great Lakes watershed with the degradation of fresh water and impacts of the climate crisis. But as we grow and evolve, I'd be interested in expanding this internationally, looking at threats to the environment and the role of arts and culture in the lack of sustainable production practices and its impact on the environment, trying to expand outside Ontario, certainly nationally, eventually. Dream life and ancestral life are a little bit more hard to explain, but ultimately it's about trying to shift from practicality to our subconscious and our hopes and our memories. So ancestral life would be about our memories and the gifts that our ancestors have passed on to us that we want to make sure are always remembered and respected. So honoring the legacy in ancestral life by amplifying the wisdoms and traditions and elevating the capacity of what Indigenous people would call knowledge keepers, what we refer to as knowledge stewards, that protect the stories, languages, and cultures of the past for future generations. And then in dream life, this is the hardest one to try to understand, but it's essentially about the artistic practice that's very creative and very imaginative. And many artists spend a lot of time in dream space, imagining with hope an alternative to the realities we face. And so manifesting hope in dream life is about trying to amplify the power and promise of vulnerable and marginalized communities to imagine and create aspirational futures where ecosystems of care can flourish. And there are a lot of necessary steps to be able to get there, because we need to address the safety and security of these communities. We need to be able to develop trust and respect with the communities that they're going to share their stories with. And so there's a lot to unpack in this area, but it's an important one to us longer term. So in terms of the next steps, what is happening in the planning process? They're in cycles of 2 months, hoping to finish and publish the final edition of our Wellsprings care plan in November of this year. So there are public consultations now in June and July for the work in progress version of our plan in plain and fluent English. In July and August, we'll try to publish out for review the preview editions of the fluent and plain languages in English, with consultations added for the work in progress versions in translation for French, plain and fluent language. In August and September, we'll try to publish out those preview editions of French and continue our consultations with deaf and disabled communities, including Braille and sign language translations in ASL and LSQ. We'll then try to publish out those disabled and deaf language translations in Braille and sign language in September and October, and continue our consultations with Indigenous language communities, publishing out everything as a first edition draft in November, and host some public information sessions at a celebratory 10th anniversary event to launch everything in November. It's meant as a living guide, so the document itself will be updated on a regular basis. So you're going to see version 1, version 2, version 3, with the invitation for community input, because it's a care plan, it's a care guide, it's meant to be open to community needs. I think what we will be doing is each year adding an appendix for our plan for the upcoming 2 years and a report on what we achieved in the previous year. And that the care plan itself will shift a little bit and evolve and grow as our learnings are achieved. How can you participate? There are 3 ways at the moment that I would highlight. a review reader, a circle participant, and maybe a fellow in one of our upcoming projects about care called Caring Cultures. So a review reader would be tasked with reviewing and reading a version of the plan that is of interest to you, whether it's the English or French or plain language ASL or whichever it is when the time comes, and providing constructive feedback. We have a limited number of honoraria available this fiscal year and next fiscal year. Our next fiscal starts August 1st, so we'll have probably about between 5 and 6 this fiscal until the end of July, and between 5 and 8 next fiscal year. So we have up to $250 honoraria, kind of based on about $50 an hour. So somewhere between 5 to 7.5 hours of self-directed reviewing and note-taking and sharing your feedback in one or more ways by writing an email to us, talking to us on the phone, in a video conference, or other ways. A circle participant would join, instead of being self-directed, would join a small group of maybe 2 or 3 people in a 2-hour video conference discussion to identify and share their feedback and suggestions with that small group. There's an honorary of about $125 for those, for people who have access needs to participate. Caring Cultures is an upcoming paid fellowship. The fee, I can't quite quote, don't quote me, I'm not going to say the fee, but it will be posted soon, to be announced in fall 2024 with 8 youth from the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. The purpose of this fellowship is to explore what is needed for the next generation to become leaders of positive social change and care in their communities, and how ASOs or intermediaries or care people like ArtsPond and others can help. The suggestions that we receive from the participants will help validate our care plan and inform the evolution of this kind of planning process into the future. So we have time for questions and answers. Please feel free to get in touch at hello@artspond.com or visit our website for more details on upcoming videos and releases of this plan. For now, I'd like to thank you for watching this video, and for those in the room with us live, we'll come to the questions in a moment. But thanks again for your time today, and we'll talk to you soon.